Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the core of everything. Today we're focusing on Lyme Regis. Lyme Regis is a coastal town which is famous, world famous for its fossils, found on the Jurassic coast in Dorset in the UK. Why we focus on Lyme Regis? Because it basically, as a present day, it shows a preservation of the Jurassic seafloor ecosystem. So it has loads of fossils in it like ammonites, belemnites, large marine reptiles, shellfish, including like bivalves and brachiopods, and even ancient snails or gastropods. We will do a quick shout out to Christopher Shannon, who's somewhere in Europe at the moment, who helped actually design the logo for the core of everything. So big shout out to Christopher Shannon, who is also somewhere in Europe.
It's very elusive.
Yeah.
Also, a huge shout out to our very own Jack, who between this episode and the last one has handed in his thesis. How many words?
42,291 pages of pure science. Really dry.
Nothing but.
I felt bad reading through it. I felt bad for the examiners reading back through it. So around page 150, I was thinking of slipping in a joke.
Yeah, a little meme or something.
Just to like break out, because
Break the tension.
I was like, geez, this is dense. You know, do you remember the AQA OCR books?
Yeah.
They always had a little
like
joke.
batteries not included on the back or something.
Yeah. They always had a little bit of joke at the bottom of every page. And I thought I was going to do one of those, but it's meant to be a formal document, isn't it?
Yeah. Well done. Big achievement.
Thank you very much. So today we're focusing on Lyme Regis. So why is it called Lyme Regis? Well, the River Lyme is adjacent to the town, so that's where Lyme comes from. And then Edward I in the 13th century used Lyme in wars against France as a port, and Regis comes from the royal connection.
From the Latin, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rex, king, Regis.
I didn't know that. Yeah, so Regis.
So how did Lyme Regis become the Lyme Regis that we see today?
Yeah, so 200 million years ago, the UK was a desert, part of the supercontinent Pangaea. And if we remember from an early episode, Pangaea was a collaboration of all the continents that came together before it broke apart to what we see now.
And this is beginning of the Jurassic, right? So,
this is 200 million years ago.
Just after the Triassic, before the Cretaceous.
Exactly, yeah. Just after a mass extinction event, I'd imagine. And the supercontinent collapsed over time. It started to drift apart, and the area became flooded. And it started with sort of lagoonal environments and lakes, and then as the sea sort of transgressed, as the sea level rose, which gradually deepened and deposited rocks with lots of organic life, which were then slowly buried. Now, this changing sea level depth produces variations of mudstones and limestones, and that's what we see at Lyme Regis.
And that's because we have different energies of the environments, right? And kind of different types of deposition of different material. Yeah,
essentially you have mudstones where the sea level's a bit deeper, and it's sort of a lower energy environment, so these very fine particles can settle on the sea floor, whereas limestones are representative of shallow marine environments where you might have a lot more life, marine life knocking about. And so these rocks do tell us about the changing sea levels, the different environments, but also how the climate has changed.
Yeah, so Earth's climate is controlled by a few different things, and one of the key things over long periods of time to geological timescales are these Milankovitch cycles. So we know that the Earth orbits around the sun, and because of its tilt, we get seasons where we get different amount of kind of solar radiation. That means the northern hemisphere is a bit warmer in the summer and cooler in the winter. But actually there are cycles that occur over much longer periods called eccentricity, obliquity, and precession. And this basically means that our climate changes over periods of time. So just to quickly go through the three of these. Eccentricity, so that's the Earth orbits the sun not in a circle, but actually in kind of an ellipsoid, so like a squashed circle basically. And the kind of how squashed that circle is, that changes on order of about 100,000 years from more circular to more elliptical. So currently it's about a 3% difference between the farthest point and the closest point between the Earth and the Sun. And that means that there's a 6% difference in the solar energy that we receive on Earth between winter and summer. So these sound like quite small changes, but actually they have quite a large effect. And these can result in things like glacial maximums and interglacial periods. So in the last glacial maximum, so where there were lots of glaciers across the Earth, the orbit was more elliptical and there was more like a 20% difference, so quite a bit larger. So that's eccentricity, happens over 100,000 years. Then we have obliquity, that's the tilt of the Earth. So we know the Earth's tilted, that's why we get the seasons. And the angle varies between about 22.5 degrees and 24.5 degrees. Now, this one happens over 41,000 years. So when you have higher tilt, that means that you have more seasonal variation because in the summer you're more tilted towards the sun, and in the winter you're further away. There's a bigger difference between the two, whereas at the lower tilt there's less seasonal variation because there's less difference between when you're pointing away from the sun and pointing towards. So that's obliquity or tilt, and that happens on 41,000 year cycles. And then you've also got precession. Now, to think about this, picture a spinning top, and kind of as it starts to lose energy, it wobbles a little bit. And if you draw a line through that spinning top, through the spinning axis, when it's spinning perfectly, it just points straight upwards. But as it wobbles, that line kind of wobbles from place to place. Currently, that line through the Earth's rotational axis points at the North Star, but that will change. So this one happens on a over a 19,000 year and or a 23,000 year cycle. So we've looked at things like ice cores and the sedimentary record to look at changing temperatures and try and work out kind of the length, the timescales that these three cycles, eccentricity, obliquity, and precession, happen on. But we do have geological evidence for these, right?
Yeah, exactly. We should point out that obviously with the current sort of human impact on the climate, Milankovitch cycles give a really good representation of ancient climates. Essentially, we can't probably use Milankovitch cycles anymore because it's very difficult to tell our own impact on the different climates.
And I guess we're talking about hugely different scales as well, like tens or hundreds of thousands of years for Milankovitch, whereas the human impact is on the order of tens of years.
Yeah, but it's just exactly. But it'll be very interesting to see how much we've disturbed the ecosystem and comparing between using Milankovitch cycles millions of years ago and using them.
Can you still use them
now? Yeah. So there's, as we say, geological evidence, and the interbedding, so the variations of mudstones and limestone at the Blue Lias is really good for understanding the cyclical changes in the climate. So if we have this low obliquity, so low tilt and low eccentricity, and even seasons, we might have particularly a warmer environment, and therefore calcium carbonate can be produced in the oceans, which produces limestone. This also means that with a warmer environment, there's also reduced erosion on land, which means less mud will be deposited in the seas. Whereas if we have more elliptical, more pronounced tilt and uneven seasons, we'd probably get increased erosion on land. Climate's typically more extreme, and a reduced calcium carbonate production, reduced limestone production, and increased mud. And so you can see this variation at Lyme Regis. But that is actually not why Lyme Regis is famous. Lyme Regis is famous for its fossils. And we can see, you can walk the beach at, which beach is it? Monmouth. You can walk Monmouth Beach and you can see big platforms of what we call ammonites. Now, ammonites are cephalopods, and modern-day cephalopods are stuff like squids, octopus, cuttlefish. Now, ammonites themselves died out 66 million years ago in the big mass extinction that everyone knows as being the
dinosaur-killing event,
the
Chicxulub impact.
Exactly. But they're all been really well preserved at Lyme Regis.
How do you preserve these things?
Well, the reason why there's so many ammonites there is actually probably not well constrained. You'd have to have a whole colony of ammonites. No one really knows why these big colonizations occur. Maybe it's because of the way they migrate. To preserve all of these ammonites, though, a lot of it's chiefly down to the energy of environments and the level of oxygen. So typically you need a low energy environment so that muds can be deposited, but also so the ammonites don't break up and
fragment.
and crash against each other. So they're still preserved in their nice
Like in
shape
situ.
in situ. Now, low oxygen is important so that bacteria and or small organisms can't feast on the carcasses. Now, at Lyme Regis, there seems to be cyclical variations in oxygen levels. So initially, we had very high levels of oxygen that colonized the sea floor with all these ammonites in the waters above, and then when periods of low oxygen meant the ammonites would sink to the sea floor and be preserved. Then what happens over time is that when they're buried, fluids might travel through the rock and precipitate out crystals that slowly replace the shells.
And typically these fluids precipitate out other minerals that actually end up replacing the shells themselves. So actually what we see now are typically casts of those shells rather than the shells themselves.
And that's what gives them the nice crystallized, a nice shiny appearance.
Yeah.
So the fact that we've got so many ammonites actually prompts our weekly segment now. What in the world? So, as you said earlier, Lyme Regis is very famous for its fossils, and one of the primary fossil collectors at Lyme Regis was a woman called Mary Anning. So, Mary Anning was a fossil collector along the south coast of the UK in the early 19th century. She discovered the first large marine reptiles in the UK, and this was the Ichthyosaurus, which is this basically very long lizard. You know, with I think it had sort of
like paddles
for for appendages. But she also discovered a pterodactyl as well, which is, if anyone's seen Jurassic Park, it's the bird with the long beak. It's like a pelican, but much more fierce.
And if I can add a little fact, the word helicopter steals a bit of that, or has a similar root of that word. So it's not, the word helicopter isn't formed from words heli and copter. It's helicopter. And it's that same pater is the same root as pterodactyl, because pterodactyl is spelled with a P at the beginning.
Ah, really?
I guess something to do with flight.
That's really good. That should be what in the world. You've winged it a bit there.
A what in the world.
So not only was she famous for discovering the Ichthyosaurus and the pterodactyl, but she was also the inspiration for the famous tongue twister, "She sells seashells on the seashore."
Because she was selling the seashells?
On the seashore.
Wow.
The seashells, she sells the seashells, I'm sure.
Oh, is that a second part to it?
Yeah, it is. Wow. I think there's like a third part, but no one knows.
Oh, wow.
So
if anyone does know, then message us with the tongue twister.
Absolutely. So
we get so much mail that we'll try and listen to everything. But it can
we get mail from Christoph Scherner, Christopher Shannon, Chris Shackley, all the same guy from Stockholm.
Brian Cox? No.
Yeah, my mum. I think we should stay on Mary Anning just for a little bit because she was a very exceptional geologist who got actually very little recognition in her life, partly because she's from a very poor background, but also because she was a woman, and back then women weren't allowed to become fellows of the Geological Society, which a lot of famous geologists were. So Mary Anning, she was born in the late 18th century, and very poor background, very little education. She actually almost died at birth. She was in the arms of three other women out for a stroll one day, and
she was in all their arms.
Well, they each one had a leg and an arm each.
Right. Okay.
A lightning strike hit the elm tree that they were taking shelter under during a thunderstorm, and the three women died, but she survived. She had to be rushed in and revived in a hot bath.
Wow.
Which is destined for great things, I suppose.
Yeah.
She also fossil collected with her father at an early age, and sadly he died when she was 9 or 10 of consumption, so TB, tuberculosis. And actually, that was, I suppose, that was a secondary cause, because actually what happened is he fell off a cliff. But he also he had TB at the same time, so a bit unlucky. After his death, she continued to fossil collect, and the story, possibly anecdotal, goes that when she was 10 years old, she started finding her first ammonites, and she was walking home one day when she met a woman who asked to buy the ammonite off of her. And that sparked a business interest. She was 10 years old. So she thought, because of the death of her father, there wasn't a lot of money coming in, they're a very poor family. So she thought, we can sell these fossils and bring in some money for the family. The business actually started to thrive, in part because of the Napoleonic Wars, because it meant that a lot of people were starting to holiday in the UK. So they would go down to Dorset and they would go and fossil hunt and they'd go buy fossils from Mary Anning. And remember, she was only, she was pre-teen. This is all happening before she was at a very early age. I feel like we mentioned the Napoleonic Wars.
I was going to say that second week on the trot. If you want to hear what else the Napoleonic Wars impacted, then go and listen to last week's episode with Matt Genge.
He obviously was incredibly influential to modern day Europe, but little did he know he would have such an impact on geologists around the world. So she was 12 years old when she made her most famous discovery. Well, it was actually her brother Joseph who found an unusual skull in the rock face. Now, Mary spent months painstakingly unearthing this 5.2 meter long skeleton. It was a monster. It was an old crocodile, if you will. That's what people thought it was. And it's something that of that size has never been seen in the UK before. And that was the Ichthyosaurus. Now, the Ichthyosaurus itself, it helped support at the time, a new theory, which is the theory of mass extinction. George Cuvier, who was the father of paleontology, introduced this theory of mass extinction, and the Ichthyosaurus, at the time being in the UK, which was bizarre, supported this theory. She ended up selling it for £23, which at the time was a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah, feed her family for quite a while.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. She also later discovered the Plesiosaurus as well, which is another large marine reptile. Another thing that she discovered was that in the pelvis or pelvic region of the Ichthyosaurus, she saw these lumps. Now, they were previously thought of as being a bezoar.
Which is?
A bezoar. So, you fan of Harry Potter?
Yeah, that's the only reference I have for this.
Snape says it, doesn't he? Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? Do you remember that scene in the first one?
I remember it from, I think it's the Half-Blood Prince, where Ron drinks some poison or something, and then Harry gives him a bezoar. A
bezoar, well-known antidote for poison in the wizarding world.
Wow.
So obviously bezoars are these clumps of, well, they're stones, aren't they? Typically found in the guts of
like kidney
goats.
stones.
Yeah, I think they're just large lumps of organic matter in the digestive system. Now, similar concretions were found in these dinosaurs by Mary Anning, but it turns out they weren't bezoars, which previously were thought of. She discovered them as being coprolites. And coprolites, as a geologist will know, is fossilized poo. So you could tell what the dinosaur was eating or just eaten as it was dying.
Yeah.
Its last supper.
Yeah, wow.
As it were.
Yeah. Did her story end well?
Well, as I say, she didn't really get the respect she deserved during her life, but she became a honorary member of the Geological Society of London after her death. She actually died quite young. She was 47 and she died of breast cancer.
Yeah.
So actually it wasn't that a happy ending.
Yeah.
But I will say that if anyone is curious of the life of Mary Anning, there is a movie out with, I think it was with Kate Winslet and Saoirse Ronan, all about the life of Mary Anning. I think a lot of it is conjecture or anecdotal, but it's called Ammonite.
Yeah.
And it was released a few years ago, I think. So go check it out.
Check it out. I'd also recommend a book called The Dinosaur Hunters. If you want to learn more about this, I've just finished reading it, and it's a really good sort of anecdotal narrative all about the discovery of the first dinosaurs, and Mary Anning features heavily.
Fantastic.
So would recommend.
Fantastic. And that concludes our episode.
That was sublime.
Very good. Very good. Not practiced at all.
Claim a victory for Mark in the pun game.
Yeah. Well, I think that's like 42-1 to me. But
I'll take it. Get off the ground.
All right. Thanks, gang. Cheers. Thanks for listening again.
See you soon.
Bye.